You've seen the Afghans and the Mujahideen in circumstances that a lot of people never get to see them. A lot of people meet them in Peshawar. You've seen them inside. You've seen them as casualties in the villages and so forth. What are your feelings? What impressions do you have about the Afghan people? What special sort of things about their character? You hear they're very tough people.
They are tough people. They know what they want, and I think it's a quality. And they have a lot of hospitality. They are quiet and tough in the same time. They are, I think that what I should say, they are open mind. They are very tolerant. They have. They are practicing Islam as a day-by-day life. They are living their religion as they are living in their life, and they are very tolerant people. For example, the first question they are going to ask you is, "Do you have the book?" But the book can be the Quran and can be the Bible. It doesn't matter. You have the book, you believe in God. And that's the most important for them. The Russians are not believing in God. So somewhere it's not a fight against communism. It's a fight against people who are not believing in God. Atheism. And the second thing I realized in working with them, they know that what they want. They know they want to have help because it's a very difficult situation for them, but they don't want to be manipulated. The society of Afghan is a very strong society, a very strong traditional society, and there is no way for the foreigners to disturb this way of society by humanitarian assistance, for example. They know what they want, they have plans, and they want to be helped in their own way. And one of the questions they may ask you is, what is your right to help me? That means that they make the game. They make the rules of the game, if I can express myself like that. And I think it's very nice. I mean, it's why they were able to fight against the Red Army. It's how they will maintain what is the Afghan nation or the Afghanistan. It's now that, inshallah, the war is ending, that the humanitarian assistance will have to deal with the Afghan population to understand their need, to understand what they think and what they want, and to help them by providing money because it's needed. There has been a lot of destruction, and Afghanistan needs the international help, that's for sure.
We hear a lot of stories from refugees and other people who've been inside Afghanistan about the conduct of the Soviets and the Kabul regime in the war. That is, the laying of mines, booby-trapped toy bombs, things like this. Have you seen examples of this? Really sort of, it's hard to say that in any aspect of war is ethical or unethical, but there are Geneva Conventions and the rules of the game, rules of war. In your experience, is this true? Are there a lot of atrocities committed by the other side or by the Mujahideen?
I heard about these toys, mines, when I was in Panjshir, by the Panjshiris, but myself I didn't see them. I just can tell you that when a child was finding a packet of cigarettes, for example, in the mountain, immediately the Mujahideen was stopping him for taking the packet of cigarettes, saying that there is perhaps a mine in it. So I think it's coming from somewhere, this kind of reaction. That means that sometimes it happened to have mine somewhere, but I saw this butterfly plastic mine.
You saw them?
I saw them
line of
myself.
friends.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
All right. I'm going to move the microphone to Paul. I'm going to stop for a second. Okay. You want to do cutaways? Okay. So we've done, I think, good answers. We need to shoot for editing purposes. These things. We need to have tape where everybody's sort of reacting but not saying.
So try to react somewhere in what I'm saying. If it's wrong or bad, I don't know what.
Very nice.
Huh?
It's not very nice.
Okay. Ready? All right.
Ah oui.
Dr. X. Tell me, I'll start at the same place I started with Laurence about the first time that you came here to Peshawar and inside Afghanistan. Tell me about that.
Well, it was a little bit later, of course, than Laurence, in '83. And it wasn't Peshawar, it was through Quetta. When I finished medical school, I did tropical medicine, and I was planning on going to some third world country. And I met some people in Belgium who spent some time in Afghanistan and who told me what was happening there and how they had worked specifically in Hazarajat with the Hazara. And from what I gathered from them, it seemed pretty interesting what was going on there. So I decided to take Afghanistan as a first contact with whatever could be done on the medical side in a third world country.
So how did you do this? Did you get in contact with the group?
I went to Médecins Sans Frontières in Paris, and they proposed me exactly that, a mission in Hazarajat. So I went for about 8 months in the winter of '83-'84.
The winter?
Yeah.
What was that like? Did you walk in all the way from?
No, at that time the Hazaras were quite well organized. I came to Quetta with 2 other people. We moved inside with the jeep, and it took only about 48 hours from Quetta to the spot inside Hazarajat, where we had a hospital.
That's quick.
That was very quick.
That sounds a lot easier than some expeditions I've heard about.
Well, I've seen some other expeditions
So
also.
What were the conditions that you worked in Hazarajat?
They were pretty exceptional for Afghanistan, probably because the Hazaras liberated their total area, with the exception of one garrison in Bamiyan from Russian or Kabul government occupation in '79. And they had at that time still a quite a good organization, even with a telephone line going from Jagri all the way up through Nawood to Besut and Yakolang. So they were able to communicate what was happening in different parts of the country. That made that on the plan of humanitarian assistance, although almost nobody was giving them anything because they were completely shut off from the world, you were able to do quite a lot. They were eager to learn things, they were eager to get something, were eager to improve whatever they could improve themselves. And in the time lapse of about 3-4 years, there was a large hospital built with surgical, radiological laboratory facilities, with dispensaries around, and with about between 5 to 10 people trained on a basic level to do consultations, some to do laboratory, some to do radiology.
Now, was this more, were you getting war casualties?
Yes, we were. They liberated their own area, but on the fringes, of course, they fought together with other people, preventing either armored car columns to get into the valleys of Hazarajat or attacking convoys on the highways. And so the most of the war casualties we saw there were people either coming from those fronts on the fringes of Hazarajat, about 2-3 days away from the hospital, or people who were injured by bombing.
Were they bombing in Hazarajat very frequently when you were there?
Not so frequently, but they usually knew exactly where to bomb. When an action was done, the offices of the parties, of the Hazara parties who assisted in the action against the government, they were bombed 2 or 3 days later in the bazaars of Hazarajat. They also bombed, when MSF started working there, they took a large government building as a hospital. And that was bombed in 81. It was completely leveled. So whenever they tried, during a certain period, they tried to find out targets. People who were still fighting, people who tried to build up something.
Do me a favor, put your hands down.
Yeah, I'm always. Okay.
I hear conflicting stories about Afghans in terms of medicine. On the one hand, they're constantly asking for pills for this ailment or that ailment. On the other hand, I've seen them be shot through the face and never whimper. Is this contradictory, or what are the Afghans like in your experience as patients?
Well, I had some experience before I left as a general practitioner and emergency medicine doctor in Belgium. And when you're on the first line, the first echelon of medical assistance in Europe, or I think in the States, you have the same problem. A lot of people come to you with difficulties, but not really medical complaints. But they translate it into something that's medical because it's the only way to get to somebody. They expect to help them. And that's frustrating, I think, if you talk with general practitioners in Europe or the US. They will all tell the same story. That most of the things,
For attention.
yeah, people
Some
just looking for
problem.
attention. And my experience in Afghanistan is pretty much the same on that aspect. When I was in Hazarajat or in Mazar-i-Sharif, a lot of people were just eager to get in contact with a doctor who would eventually be able to cure them if anything was wrong. And a lot of the complaints were provoked by the strain of war, by the fear of the bombing, and was situated more on a psychological level, I think, than on a real physical illness. And then once people got really hurt, wounded by the war, you get a complete different picture because they're able to stand quite a lot without really complaining.
Are there any particular individuals that stand out in your mind, any people that you treated inside or met in Afghanistan that really impressed you in some way?
I met quite a lot of individuals that impressed me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come back several times.
How many times did you go in all?
4 times, for about total period of 2 years, I think. What impressed me most was when I went to Mazar-i-Sharif, because we were asked by the general commander of the area, who who covered about 3 provinces at that time, to help him to set up a whole system of health. And when we finally arrived after a journey of 50 days walking that time, up all the way up to the north, this commander with a lot of his assistants had driven on a mine and was dead when we arrived. So at that moment the resistance there was in a very bad spot. And what surprised us was that although they were constantly under attack from governmental troops and Russians for about 4 months, they managed to keep the region from falling apart completely, to drive out all 4 invading forces, and to restabilize everything on a fairly normal level.
You have visited a fair amount of territory in Afghanistan and have dealt with civilians as well as the Mujahideen. How much support is there on the civilian population for the Mujahideen and for the Kabul regime?
Well, I've mainly traveled, I've never seen the cities in Afghanistan, except from afar. I've traveled through the rural areas, to big bazaars, to townships, and those were always in favor of the resistance as a whole. You sometimes had frictions between some groups, but mainly we were always welcomed, and we were always under protection of one group of the Mujahideen, which is of course unavoidable. If you go to a country at war, you need protection from one of the parties. And from what I've seen, the difference between population and Mujahideen is very difficult to make, because from what I gather, I wasn't there when it started, but from what I gather, it's just the population who started fighting against a regime they didn't like. And it's every family giving one of their members to fight what they don't want. So you can't say it's a military force fighting and then maybe somebody giving aid to this military force. It's a people fighting. And one of the ways to fight what they want to keep out of the country is creating a military force to fight the army.
In Peshawar, you see and hear about a lot of friction between the parties and the alliance, even the parties within the alliance, and there are a number of parties outside the alliance, and you hear about a lot of bickering and squabbling and disagreements. Do you see more of this or less of this inside?
Well, I've always seen less of it. Simply probably because people, when they're faced with the actual fact of war, there's a common enemy, and all the rather small differences which can be blown up to big political issues, they settle down inside. And when the common enemy is there, everybody has the same basic view. They want this thing not to happen to Afghanistan.
This tape is just about out. I don't think we have time for even one more question. I want to ask you a couple more questions before I go to Desiree, but we'll have to change tapes. I think this is finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
Je ziet altijd zo tussen.
Let it roll. Okay, the camera's still rolling, but this is just, again, for cutaways. And I want to get back to a little bit about the political situation in Afghanistan, or Peshawar in Afghanistan, how you feel maybe this whole thing is going to shake out after the Russians leave. Everybody that I talked to about what's going on inside said it'll never happen that way.
No.
It'll never happen that way. Afghans are not that way. and that most of the people would not support a hardline, fundamentalist, Khomeini style. This guy once said, when